Alexander Pierce adjusted the worn cap on his head, pulling it low enough to cast a shadow over his face. The reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror hardly resembled the polished CEO the world knew. His usual tailored suits had been traded for a faded gray uniform, his neatly styled hair now slightly disheveled. A name tag clipped to his chest read Alex Porter, just another worker among many. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Tonight wasn't about board meetings or shareholder reports. Tonight, he was just another night shift employee at Pierce Dynamics, the company he had built from the ground up. He'd spent years believing in its vision, trusting the leadership beneath him to uphold his values. Yet rumors of mistreatment, excessive overtime, and declining morale had reached his ears. The reports frustrated him, but frustration wasn't enough. He needed to see the truth for himself. The warehouse floor buzzed with activity, dimly lit under the industrial lights. Machines hummed, conveyor belts groaned, and the scent of oil and stale coffee lingered in the air. Workers moved like ghosts through the aisles, their faces etched with quiet exhaustion. A sharp voice snapped him from his thoughts. "New guy, you deaf or just slow?" Alexander turned to find a supervisor with a clipboard, his brow furrowed in impatience. "Aye. Break's over. Get moving." The man didn't wait for a response before striding away, already shouting orders at someone else. Alexander swallowed his pride and moved. This was what he had come for, the unfiltered reality. He fell in line, sweeping debris from the warehouse floor. The work wasn't difficult, but it was relentless. He noticed how the other workers barely spoke, their movements mechanical, as if the weight of their shifts had stripped away the energy for conversation. It was then that he spotted an elderly janitor, hunched over a mop, his frail frame moving with slow, deliberate effort. The man's uniform was even more faded than Alexander's, the fabric worn thin from years of labor. A slight limp accompanied his steps, yet he didn't pause, didn't complain. Curiosity tugged at Alexander. The man had to be well past retirement age. What was he doing here? "Need a hand?" Alexander asked, stepping beside him. The old man glanced up, his weary blue eyes registering surprise before softening into something like amusement. "You offering to clean up my mess, kid?" Alexander smiled faintly. "Guess so." The janitor chuckled. "Well, that's a first." He wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "Name's Henry. Henry Dawson, asterisk asterisk. Alex. Well, Alex, if you're willing to help, I won't stop you. But don't let the supervisors catch you. Helping someone else ain't exactly encouraged." That made Alexander's stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral. "You been here long?" 32 years. Henry wrung out the mop and set it back to the floor. "Not sure if that makes me loyal or just too stubborn to quit." "Why not retire?" Henry gave a small, tired laugh. "Would if I could." He hesitated, glancing at Alexander as if measuring how much to share. "Got a daughter. She's real sick. Hospital bills don't pay themselves, so here I am." A slow, simmering anger spread through Alexander's chest. No one working for his company should be forced into this. Yet here was Henry, working himself to the bone, long past the years he should have been resting. Henry must have mistaken Alexander's silence for pity, because he waved a dismissive hand. "Don't go looking at me like that. I'll be fine. Just need to put in a few extra shifts." A few extra shifts? Alexander had already felt the strain of one night. How much more was Henry enduring? The thought soured as he watched a floor supervisor stride past, barely sparing Henry a glance. The man clearly noticed the elderly janitor's struggle, but said nothing. No offer of help. No concern. Just indifference. Henry suddenly reached for his pocket, pulling out an old flip phone. His hands trembled slightly as he checked the screen. A faint frown flickered across his face before he tucked it away. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked. Henry forced a smile. "Yeah, just waiting on an update." He exhaled heavily. "Enough about me. You new here?" "First night," Alexander said. Henry grinned. "Then let me give you some advice. Stay invisible. Do your job, don't ask questions, and never, ever expect the higher-ups to care." The word stung in a way Henry couldn't have known. Alexander was the higher-up, and if what Henry said was true, then somewhere along the way, he had failed. A loud clang shattered the moment. Across the warehouse, a worker had dropped a heavy crate, its contents spilling across the floor. The man paled as the supervisor stormed over, voice dripping with anger. "Do you know how much that costs?" "Yes, sir, I." Asterisk asterisk, that's coming out of your paycheck. Asterisk asterisk. Alexander stiffened, his fingers curling into fists. The worker looked terrified, shoulders hunched under the weight of the threat. It was just a mistake. Why was this the reaction? Henry sighed beside him. "It's like that every night," he muttered. "They know we need the job, so they take everything they can." Alexander's pulse pounded in his ears. He had come here for answers. Now he had them. This wasn't mismanagement. This was exploitation. And it wasn't just Henry. It was everyone. He had built this company with the belief that his employees were its foundation. Somewhere, someone had twisted that foundation into a prison. Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. For now, he would play his role. He would endure this night like the others had endured so many before him. But soon, very soon, the people who allowed this would understand exactly what it meant to betray their own. The warehouse lights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor. The air was thick with exhaustion, an almost tangible weight pressing down on the workers as they trudged through another shift. Alexander had been here only a few nights, but already the patterns were clear: the fear, the quiet suffering, the unspoken rules that dictated who survived in this place and who didn't. Supervisors like Ethan Graves ensured the hierarchy remained untouched. Alexander had observed the man carefully, his sharp, predatory gaze sweeping across the floor, searching for any sign of defiance. He thrived on control, ruling through veiled threats and passive cruelty. The workers feared him. Even Henry, who had survived decades in this company, kept his head down when Ethan passed. Tonight, the warehouse was running behind schedule. A shipping delay had sent the supervisors into a frenzy, and the pressure fell, as always, on the workers. Alexander caught sight of Henry, mopping near the loading docks, his movements slower than usual. The old man was pushing himself beyond his limits, his hands trembling as he gripped the mop handle. A fresh wave of frustration surged in Alexander's chest. "You look like you need a break," Alexander said, stepping beside him. Henry gave a dry chuckle, though it was strained. "Ain't got time for breaks. They already cut my last paycheck for unauthorized rest." Alexander stiffened. "They cut your pay for stopping." "Didn't log out," Henry muttered. "They called it theft of company time." Something inside Alexander snapped. This was more than just negligence. Asterisk asterisk. This was deliberate exploitation. Asterisk asterisk. Before he could say anything, Ethan's voice rang out. "Dawson, that floor better be clean in 10, or I'm docking another hour off your pay." Alexander turned, forcing himself to remain expressionless. Ethan wasn't a large man, but he carried himself like someone who enjoyed breaking others down. His suit was crisp, his watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the workers beneath him. Henry gave a tight nod and kept mopping, though Alexander could see the way his knuckles whitened with the effort. Ethan's eyes flicked to Alexander. "And you, new guy, don't get too comfortable. We don't pay for conversations." Alexander held his gaze, his jaw tight. If only Ethan knew who he was speaking to. But not yet. Not yet. Ethan smirked, as if satisfied by Alexander's silence, and walked off, barking orders at a group of workers handling a conveyor belt. Alexander exhaled slowly, willing himself to stay in control. His time would come. Hours passed, the warehouse grinding on like a massive, uncaring machine. It wasn't until near the end of the shift that everything changed. Henry had been pushing himself too hard. Alexander had seen the signs, the stiffness in his limbs, the way his breath came shorter and sharper. But Henry was stubborn. He kept going, until he couldn't. One moment he was standing. The next, he crumpled to the ground. The thud was soft beneath the noise of the warehouse, but Alexander heard it. He turned just in time to see Henry collapse, his mop slipping from his fingers. "Henry!" Alexander was at his side in an instant, shaking his shoulder. The old man's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath a struggle. A few workers hesitated nearby, concern flickering across their faces, but none of them moved. Fear kept them rooted in place. Ethan arrived within moments, scowling. "What the hell is going on?" "He collapsed," Alexander snapped. "He needs an ambulance." Ethan sneered. "An ambulance? Do you have any idea how much that costs?" Alexander felt his control fray. Asterisk asterisk. He's having a medical emergency. Asterisk asterisk. Ethan crossed his arms. If he can't handle the job, he shouldn't be here. Alexander's fists clenched. He had witnessed cruelty before, but this was something else. Henry wasn't just an employee to these people, he was disposable. "I'll call an ambulance," Alexander said, pulling out his phone. Ethan's hand snatched his wrist in an iron grip. "You do that and he's fired. You hear me?" The air thickened. Every muscle in Alexander's body tensed, a storm raging beneath his skin. He met Ethan's cold, unfeeling stare, and for the first time, he wanted to break his cover. Instead, he smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. He pulled his wrist free, dialed the number, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Yes, I need an ambulance. We have a worker who just collapsed from exhaustion." Ethan's face darkened. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating. Workers exchanged glances, some barely able to hide the small glimmers of hope in their expressions. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics rushed in, kneeling beside Henry. One checked his pulse, the other speaking in a calm, measured voice. Alexander stayed beside Henry until the old man was lifted onto stretcher. His eyes fluttered open, disoriented, but relief crossed his face when he saw Alexander. "Don't worry," Alexander murmured. "You're going to be okay." Henry's fingers curled weakly around Alexander's wrist. "Don't let them take my job." Alexander's throat tightened. This man had nearly died working, and his first thought was about keeping his job. He squeezed Henry's hand. "Just focus on getting better." As the paramedics wheeled him away, Ethan turned on Alexander. "You just cost this company thousands in liability," he hissed. Alexander met his glare without flinching. "You did that yourself." Ethan's smirk returned. "You think this changes anything? Dawson will be replaced by the end of the week. You're next." Alexander laughed, a low, quiet sound that made Ethan's smug expression falter. "You have no idea who I am," Alexander said softly. For the first time, Ethan looked uncertain. Alexander turned, walking away without another word. He had seen enough. Tomorrow, the company would wake up to a different reality. Morning light poured through the glass windows of Pierce Dynamics corporate headquarters, illuminating the sleek marble floors and pristine desks that stood in stark contrast to the grime and exhaustion of the warehouse. The same company, yet 2 different worlds. Alexander Pierce stepped out of the elevator, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as he walked with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the space. Because he did. Gone was the faded janitor's uniform, replaced with the tailored navy suit that fit him like armor. His face, once shadowed by the brim of a cap, was now clean-shaven, his hair neatly styled. He looked every bit the billionaire CEO he was. And today, everyone in this building, especially Ethan Graves, would remember exactly who he was. He strode past the receptionist, who nearly stumbled over her greeting, and through the main office space, where employees straightened in their seats, eyes wide. Whispers followed him like ripples in water. He had been absent from this office for months, traveling between divisions, trusting his leadership to run things smoothly. He had trusted the wrong people. Stepping into the boardroom, he found his senior staff already seated, executives, department heads, and at the center, looking infuriatingly comfortable, Ethan Graves. Ethan barely spared him a glance, busy scrolling through his phone. The moment Alexander took his seat at the head of the table, the room fell silent. Ethan looked up then, his smirk faltering for just a second before he leaned back in his chair. "Sir, wasn't expecting you in today." Alexander folded his hands on the table. Clearly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that had always made weaker men nervous. A few executives exchanged wary glances. They could sense it, something was coming, Alexander let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle in. Then he leaned forward slightly and spoke the words that turned the entire room to ice. "I spent the last 2 weeks working undercover in my own warehouse." The reaction was immediate. A few people stiffened, some glanced at each other in panic, but Ethan just scoffed. "You what?" His laugh was forced, the confidence in his eyes flickering. "Sir, why would you even do that?" Alexander ignored him, turning his gaze to the other executives. "I saw my employees breaking their backs, terrified of losing their jobs. I saw supervisors stealing wages, forcing overtime, without pay, punishing people for needing a moment to breathe." He let his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "I watched a man nearly die on my floor because of our negligence." Silence. One of the HR heads swallowed hard. Sir, if you'd brought these concerns to us, we would have. I did bring them to you, Alexander interrupted, his voice dangerously low. Months ago, and you told me everything was fine. The color drained from her face. Ethan shifted in his seat, his usual arrogance replaced with something colder. Sir, with all due respect, these workers. Alexander turned to him. Careful. The single word sliced through the room like a blade. For the first time, Ethan looked uncertain. I watched you threaten and injure an employee last night. I watched you cut wages, humiliate workers, treat them like they were nothing. Alexander's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned. You thought no one was watching. Ethan sat up, feigning a laugh. Come on, you can't seriously be. You're fired. The words hit like a gunshot. The room froze. Ethan blinked, his smirk finally gone. What? You heard me, Alexander said. Pack your things. You're done, Ethan's face twisted, his carefully crafted arrogance shattering. You can't just. I can. Alexander stood, adjusting his suit. And I just did. Security entered the room without a word, as if they had been waiting. Ethan shot to his feet. This is a mistake. No, Alexander met his eyes. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't find out. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. A moment later, security flanked him waiting. Realization set in. He had lost. With a furious glare, Ethan shoved his chair back and stormed out, the doors slamming behind him. Alexander exhaled slowly, then turned to the rest of the executives. His voice was quieter now, but just as sharp. If anyone in this room was complicit, speak now. No one dared. Good. He straightened his cuffs, the weight of his next words settling over them. Because this company is about to change. And if you can't handle that, you can leave now. Not a single person moved. Alexander's gaze swept the room. Then, satisfied, he turned and walked out. There was still one more person he needed to see. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet suffering. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Alexander walked down the sterile hallway, a bouquet of fresh flowers in his hand. He had spent the entire morning overseeing the sweeping changes now taking effect at Pierce Dynamics, wage corrections, policy overhauls, and the termination of every manager complicit in the abuse. The company would never be the same. It couldn't be. But none of that mattered if the man who had made him see the truth wasn't okay. He reached the doorway and paused. Inside, Henry Dawson sat propped against pillows, an .4 in his arm, his weathered face slightly less pale than the last time Alexander had seen him. A frail woman, her resemblance to Henry unmistakable, sat by his bedside, worry still lingering in her eyes. Alexander knocked lightly on the doorframe. Henry looked up, then squinted, confusion flickering across his face. Alex. Alexander stepped inside, setting the flowers on the bedside table. It's good to see you awake. The old man gave him a long, searching look, then huffed a small laugh. I feel like I got run over by a damn forklift. Alexander smirked, pulling up a chair. Considering how hard you were pushing yourself, I'm surprised that didn't happen sooner. Henry shook his head, eyes still locked onto him. Then, with slow realization, his expression changed. Wait a second. His brow furrowed. The news this morning. They said the CEO was undercover in the warehouse. Alexander didn't look away. He let the truth settle. Henry exhaled sharply. You. I should have told you, Alexander admitted. But I needed to see it for myself. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to Alexander's surprise, Henry chuckled. Well, I'll be damned. I taught the CEO how to mop a floor. Alexander laughed, shaking his head. You did a terrible job training me, by the way. Henry smirked, but his expression turned more serious as he studied Alexander again. So what happens now? Alexander leaned forward. Things change. Wages are being restored, overtime will be paid, and no one will be punished for needing a break. That includes you. Henry's jaw tightened. They'll fire me. No, Alexander said firmly. In fact, I was hoping you'd take a new position. Henry raised a skeptical brow. Alexander pulled a folded document from his coat pocket and handed it over. You're officially retired. Henry's breath hitched as he unfolded the paper, his hands trembling slightly. What? You've worked yourself to the bone for this company, Alexander said, his voice softer now. That ends today. Your pension is restored with back pay. Your daughter's medical bills? Covered. Henry's daughter gasped, her eyes welling with tears. Henry, however, just stared at the paper. His fingers tightened around it as his throat bobbed in a swallow. Alex, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Alexander replied. Just let me do the right thing. For a long moment, Henry said nothing. Then, slowly, he set the paper down and reached out. Alexander clasped his hand. The old man's grip was firm, but his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you, son. A lump formed in Alexander's throat. He just nodded. They sat in quiet understanding. Then Henry smirked. So, you're really the guy in charge? Alexander chuckled, surprised. Henry leaned back, shaking his head with a tired smile. No, but I sure as hell feel bad for the idiots who didn't see it coming. Alexander grinned. So did he. The following weeks were transformative. Supervisors were replaced with leaders who valued their employees. Wages increased. Employee benefits were expanded. And most importantly, fear was removed from the workplace. One afternoon, Alexander walked through the now vibrant, bustling warehouse floor, this time as himself. Workers stopped when they saw him, murmurs spreading. Some seemed hesitant, but Alexander simply offered a nod and a small, knowing smile before rolling up his sleeves. Sir. One of the workers hesitated. What are you doing? Alexander grabbed a mop from the supply closet and smirked. Just making sure Henry's replacement is doing it right. Laughter rippled through the warehouse. And for the first time in years, Pierce Dynamics was exactly what it was always meant to be.